let's bring into the conversation our friend, political analyst Brian Sobel, and he joins me. Brian, good to see you. Thanks for being with us, and Happy New Year. Oh, Brian, I think you are muted there, actually.
All right.
All right, there we
go. Glitch, but Andrew, Happy New Year. And yes, we could talk about Iowa and whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I was first wanted to kind of pick your brain because we know that Donald Trump is going to be in D.C. tomorrow. He's going to be attending some of these oral arguments in the appeals process when it comes to this question that's now going to be posed to a lot of the federal bench there on presidential immunity, whether or not Donald Trump can be charged or prosecuted for alleged crimes that he may have committed while president. So Donald Trump's doing that tomorrow, Brian. He's not in Iowa campaigning. Does that even matter? He's so far ahead.
Andrew, he's basically run his own course here. He has not attended any of the debates. As you suggest, he's way ahead in Iowa, but in many of the battleground states. And I think he is feeling like, hey, I've got bigger fish to fry in terms of the Supreme Court decision and arguments. And, of course, we could talk about the whole concept of these indictments and whether he should be kept off the ballot.
Yeah, of course, Brian, I want to put up this this tweet here, just kind of a screenshot of the Truth Social post Trump made today, confirming he'll be in D.C. tomorrow for these immunity arguments. We saw his motorcade land there at Dulles. He says, I will be attending the federal appeals court arguments on presidential immunity in Washington on Tuesday. Of course, I was entitled as president of the United States and commander-in-chief to immunity. I wasn't campaigning. The election was long over. I was looking for voter fraud and finding it, which is my obligation to do, and otherwise running our country. If I don't get immunity, he goes on to say, then crooked Joe Biden doesn't get immunity. Brian, is that somewhat of an explicit threat that if, Trump became president yet again and Biden wasn't in office, that Donald Trump's kind of going to use the full force of the DOJ to go after Biden?
I think so. I think he has scores to settle, Andrew, and he's making it very clear that he will be going after members of the government, even the former president, should he become president. But this doesn't bode well, of course, for the debate across the nation as we hit the Iowa caucuses on Monday, followed very quickly thereafter by the New Hampshire primary, which there are differences between these two things. And, of course, how the Supreme Court weighs in on whether he remains on the ballot in Maine is going to be of some interest, and elsewhere, but potentially. So we've got some very busy days ahead of us in terms of the political schedule and how this all comes down.
Brian, as well, I was covering the 2020 presidential election last cycle. And I just want to remind viewers and probably voters, too, that Biden didn't win Iowa and Biden didn't win New Hampshire. It took him all the way to South Carolina to get that momentum. I guess for Trump, though, he doesn't need that. But for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, they do need that. They need that momentum, especially Nikki Haley needs to keep it going into New Hampshire, especially there. Are you anticipating any upsets in Iowa, or is this Trump's to lose?
I think it's Trump's to lose, but you point out something that's very important. In terms of the delegate count for Republicans going to the national convention, what happens in Iowa represents about 1.5 or 1.6 of the total vote going into the national convention. So what Iowa represents, really more than anything else, is a bellwether as to how this may go under Trump in terms of the count, certainly in Iowa, but really, I think in New Hampshire. So it's important for Nikki Haley, as an example, to have a really good showing, or Ron DeSantis. Again, it doesn't mean anything in the bigger picture, really, but it does send the signal to the nation and to other Republicans that somebody has some momentum other than Trump. Although Trump will win this thing in terms of the caucus votes, undoubtedly, going forward.
Yeah, of course, it'll be interesting to see whether or not, Iowa Republicans, especially, remember the Iowa governor, Kim Reynolds, she endorsed Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, in most polls, remains at number two there in Iowa. Do you think if he cannot manage, number two or number one in Iowa, that, he's going to have to drop out? Do you think his political obituary will be written after Iowa, or will he stay in it a little longer?
Oh, he'll stay in longer. Iowa, again, is, the first time we are having a national discussion with real people making a real choice. New Hampshire will be very important. And of course, February is a very busy schedule, and March was Super Tuesday. He'll hang in for a while longer. He has to. And Nikki Haley. I think this will be the determinant, however, Andrew, for Ramaswamy, for Chris Christie. This is the time in the cycle where other also-rans have to make some hard decisions about whether they want to keep spending money and going out on the hustings.
Yeah, I was listening to some podcasts. I was reading a lot about the race over the weekend because I've been grappling with, if you're an anti-Trump Republican conservative like Chris Christie, you've staked your whole campaign on the fact that you're the loudest anti-Trump voice in the room. Yet in New Hampshire, if you're Chris Christie, you're splitting the anti-Trump vote. Of course, New Hampshire electorally looks so much different than Iowa when it comes to these early nominating contests. And so I've been grappling with, well, why does Christie just not get out? Doesn't he want the race to consolidate and coalesce around, fewer people than if he would be in it here? And I was reminded, I read a quote and I thought it was interesting. If you're Chris Christie and you've been devoting basically a year to this, you don't just bow out so quickly, do you? And if you have the money to boot.
I think that's the thing. It's often the case among political analysts and others around the debate is around why do people stay in? Well, they stay in because they're getting national recognition. They have a voice. In the case of Chris Christie, he's going almost exclusively at Donald Trump, trying to knock Donald Trump down. And, the jury's out about whether he's made any progress on that. And he also has some money to spend, but a lot less than others. And so somebody like Chris Christie, certainly after New Hampshire, is going to have to take the decision about bowing out and throwing his endorsement behind one of the other candidates, which, by the way, Republicans, other than Trump, are going to have to do to find the one person they think can take on Trump for those people who are not interested in Donald Trump.
It's so interesting because the polling for the last 12 months has had Trump so ahead, hit by historic margins, really 50, 60% of some of the Republican primary electorate in these early states here. But Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, they say on the campaign trail, no one's voted yet, Brian.
Right.
And so do you think we're going to see it track there with the polling, or could we see some surprises that maybe DeSantis is closer than we think? Maybe Trump doesn't have an all-commanding lead as we have thought over the last year or so. Because like I said, I'm going to make this point a lot on caucus night. No one has voted yet until caucus night.
Right. And even caucus night is sort of a Byzantine process that is hard to follow, right? The New Hampshire primary, a true primary, is going to be the one that I think a lot of people are going to be looking at to see who needs to drop out, if there's going to be coalescing among these other candidates to keep Trump from getting the nomination. All of these huge leads by Trump remain to be seen because, frankly, Trump has not debated anybody. And at some point, I would think Republicans would want to hear a head-to-head or, two or three candidates who may be remaining on the Republican side talking about the issues. Trump's really enjoyed this opportunity to not have to talk about anything. Yeah. And but that may be coming to an end. We will see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, depending on how close it is in Iowa and New Hampshire, will that somewhat force Trump's hand? Say Nikki Haley does really well, say Ron DeSantis does really well. Maybe they don't win the state, but they do really well. They come really close. Maybe that will force Trump's hand to get on that debate stage. Does he owe it to the voters?
I think so. I think his advisors will tell him, hey, now's the time that we need to take these folks on directly. It's like anything. If you're that far out in front, what's the point? Why would you go into a debate where you can only lose points? And so Trump's taking the decision that, hey, I'll wait until the game forces me to come off the bench.
All right. All right. As always, Brian, we do appreciate your insight. I think we're going to be talking a lot in the next month or so as these early nominating contests kick off there in a week in Iowa. Can't believe it's already here. Brian, thanks so much.
Absolutely. It'll be my pleasure. Have a good night, Andrew.